Hi, all. This is me, Elizabeth. I'm doing a podcast. I'm going to try again and do a podcast. This time, this podcast is about Adelaide's nasty, manky, shitty underbelly and the family murders. Okay, so I guess to really get into it, I have to start right from the beginning. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, Adelaide was a totally different place and era. Homosexual activity was outlawed and the community was basically secluded. They had to hide themselves. You were not allowed to be gay in Adelaide. It was illegal. If you got caught, you'd get charged with buggery or some other offence. If you were lucky, you'd get a fine, and if you were unlucky, you'd get thrown in jail. And that was the way it was back in the 50s and 60s. So basically, Adelaide's gay community had very, very little opportunity to meet people that were like-minded. Very little opportunity to network and have friends. So basically they made up places called beats. Now these beats were dark, they were very shitty, and they were basically in secluded areas off the beaten track where you wouldn't expect people to meet. One of the beats, beat one, was at the River Torrens, at the toilets in Jolly's Boathouse. Number 2 beat was at Ville Gardens, and number 3 beat was at the park on the end of Unley Road. None of these places were safe. None of these places were good to be at, especially at night. But these people had very little choice but to go there and do what they had to do. People would find where these beats were, and they would actually go and bash the people who would meet there. It was called poofter bashing, and in the 50s and 60s it was the height of good humour to go to these beats and beat what they called poofters. And the problem with this came to a head when Dr. George Duncan, a law professor at Adelaide University, was beaten severely and thrown in the River Torrens, and as he couldn't swim and only had one lung, he did not survive and he died. A fringe group of gay activists from Adelaide Uni decided to make a safer alternative, and they decided to meet weekly at a bookshop in Rundle Mall to discuss how they were going to change Adelaide's old homosexuality laws and make it legal and proper to be gay in Adelaide without fear of being chased by the police or getting arrested and thrown in jail. Mind you, these students were not just, any students. They were like law students, they were medical students, they were high up people. And they also offered screening of gay porn and child porn, which they imported from Southeast Asia and Europe. It was very available there at the time. Security at the airports aren't like they are now, and it was very, very easy to get that stuff in or sent to you, and that's what happened. So that was happening. And as time went on, the group grew. More people wanted to join. This created problems because there was a thing called the Special Squad. Now, the Special Squad was a task force of detectives and investigators and police who would go out and search for homosexuals to arrest and throw in jail. And this group, who were meeting at the bookshop, had come to the Special Squad's notice. Also, the place was getting a bit too small for the members who were joining. So a certain lawyer, who is now deceased, offered his premises to meet at. But also a vetting process had to be made, because all it took was one mistake and they would have all been busted all at once. And their degrees would have gone down the tube, their careers would have gone down the tube, and they just couldn't afford to get caught. So a vetting process took place. So what happened was the group split into two groups. You had the inner circle, which was the homosexual doctors, the lawyers, the politicians, the judges, the solicitors, and then you had the outer circles, which we, as public citizens, are more familiar with. The outer circle was made up of transgender people, drag queens, drug addicts who would offer sexual services to the group in return for money and drugs. And some of these people were doctors, so that was no problem for them to get drugs and give them drugs in return for sex. And basically they were procurers and bottom feeders. And they would willingly go out and do the dirty work of the family at the group's behest, such as procuring children or a particular boy or girl they may have liked for a sex party or a gathering where sexual activity would take place, and they knew that. But I just want to point out that these children that were being procured by the family were street kids. They were the most down and out of the most down and out, and they were the most oppressed of all. They had even less rights than gays at the time. What the procurers would do is they would hang out at gaming parlours and amusement arcades like Downtown and Tilt, and they would find a child that they'd like or that fit the family's criteria of what they wanted for that particular day or night, and they would fill the child's machine up with change and offer them a meal and a bed for the night. And, well, given the alternatives of probably sleeping in a cardboard box as opposed to being offered for a bed, and all you had to do was have sex with the man, a lot of them took that up on that offer. Some knew what they were getting into because they'd been sexually abused before. They'd been on the streets a while, and they knew the system and the way things worked. It was just a way of life. It's how you survived. I mean, it wasn't new to them. But there were some that had absolutely no idea what they were getting into when they went and took these procurers up on their offer. They honestly took the procurer on face value that the procurer wanted to buy them a meal and take them home and tuck them into bed and give them a teddy bear and give them a kiss goodnight. No, that's not the way it worked. Now, these kids, normally they were from state care, and the family liked that because who gave a shit about street kids and who gave a shit about state wards and kids like that? Nobody. Nobody cared about us. Nobody cared if we lived or died. If we went missing, who'd look for us? Who'd come? The cops wouldn't care. Nobody would. So, you had some of these homes, or shelters, or admission units, that knew full well what was going on and that these kids were being sexually abused, and they were all for it because they were receiving money in kickbacks to make the child amenable to the sexual abuse. And from my personal experience, from what I saw, it was not strange or unusual for a child or children to go missing for days or weeks on end, and then out of the blue be dropped off back at their home in a real nice car, you know, the top model Ford or maybe a limo, and a back seat full of toys and clothes and stuff that they'd never be able to afford by themselves, and a fistful of money. Well, they didn't get that for no reason, did they? So that was whether the government knew or not, they certainly weren't saying. And certainly nothing was being done about it. Nothing. And it also wasn't unusual for a procurer or the particular abuser to come to the home and ask for the same child again and again and again. And if the child wasn't being called on and asked for, they'd just run off, abscond, hang out at downtown or Tilt, and they knew that sooner or later their procurer was going to come and pick them up and take them to their abuser, where the whole cycle would start again. I also know from personal experience some of the children did move in with their abusers, and they would be, treated like gold and sent to private schools. Not mentioning any names like St. Aloysius or Pembroke. The only thing is, kids don't get any younger, they get older. And as soon as that kid got too old or was no longer useful to the family, they'd just discard them and just throw them in the bin like rubbish. Throw them back out on the streets. And that would be the best case scenario. And more often than not, a new child would go take their place. A younger one that wasn't so old. A prettier one. A nicer one. And the sad fact is, and from what I saw, time and time and time again, these kids were being drugged up to the eyeballs so they could be abused. They were given Serapaks by their procurers. They were being given Mandrax. They were being given Valium, huge amounts of Valium. They'd be given endone, stuff like that, to make them more amenable to be abused. And a lot of them became addicts. And when they were too old for the family, they reached the age of, 17, 18, which is, getting a bit too old for the family, they would then become procurers themselves to support the habit that the family gave them in the first place. So they would be going out and getting fresh meat from places like downtown and Tilt and Time Zone and delivering them to the abusers in return for drugs and money. And I don't actually think that we'll ever know how many victims are actually out there of the family. I know personally of about 10 just off the top of my head. A lot of them were too scared and embarrassed to come forward because they thought that the cops wouldn't believe them. They thought that they'd be made fun of. And they were just downright embarrassed and ashamed of what they did and what they had to do to survive. And then you had that element that knew the cops were in on it anyway. And to a point protecting the family. So how are you going to go to the same police that are supposed to be protecting you that are protecting them? It just doesn't work. And you get the element also that are still connected to the family today because they believe that they owe the family something for what they gave them in the early years. I'm talking about the gifts, the drugs, whatever, and are too scared to break away from the actual cycle. And you don't need to go any further than a place like Whitmore Square or Hutt Street Community Centre to hear their stories. And even with the Ted Mulligan inquiry into state water abuse, it didn't even scratch the surface. It didn't even... A lot of people were too scared to even come forward because they wanted to live. A lot of people were threatened not to say anything. A lot of people were told that if they did say anything that they would be sued. Or they thought that their abuser was too big to take down. As far as I'm concerned, it was a pointless exercise and a waste of taxpayers' money. It didn't tell us anything we didn't already know. And the number of victims that did come forward to Mr. Mulligan were so few that it isn't even funny. The victims that came forward were just so few. And a lot of the recommendations that Mr. Mulligan put forward to prevent this from ever happening again have not been implemented by any government authority. And very, very few perpetrators have actually been prosecuted because of the inquiry. It was just a complete waste. And I don't think we'll ever get to the number of victims that were in the past and also that are still connected to the family in the present. And when I say in the present, yeah, the family is still around. They didn't just pack up and go somewhere. They're still around. And they know who they are. The people who actually have their eyes open know who they are. And they're living their merry lives knowing what they did. disgusting. Anyway, my next episode, I'll be focusing on some of the known victims of the family. I think I'll probably start with Dr. George Duncan. And we'll go on from there. I hope to do a 10-episode series about that. And then after I finish this series, I'm going to do a series about a thing called Midnight Productions that is running rampant in America, which is very, very much like the family, except with the family, you actually get to live. Anyway, thanks for listening, guys, and don't forget to smash that like button and share, and please subscribe if you're interested in what I have to say. And I'll see you next week as we go down this manky, disgusting, shitty rabbit hole that is Adelaide's darkest underbelly, and that foul group called the family. Absolute utter pigs. Thank you, guys. We'll see you again.